My vision for humanity is that each person really becomes the CEO of their agent army. And everyone gets to up-level their work and their thinking to do the kind of work that only humans can do.
Welcome to Technoventure. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Aaref Hilaly. Aaref is a partner at Bain Capital Ventures focused on seed and Series A investments in AI-powered applications. He joined the team in 2020 after 7 years as a partner at Sequoia Capital. He's also the co-founder and former CEO of CenterRun and Clearwell Systems, each of which was acquired. I look forward to hearing more about his perspectives on the evolution of artificial intelligence, what he looks for in founders of companies that he invests in, how his past as an entrepreneur informs his present role as an investor, and more. Aaref, welcome to Technoventure. It's great to speak with you today.
Thanks, Peter. It's wonderful to be here.
Wonderful. Well, as I mentioned, in fact, you and I originally got to know each other when you were at Sequoia. Back in 2020, you made the move to Bain Capital Ventures. Talk a bit about having now worked at two august institutions in the venture space. What drew you to Bain Capital Ventures back in 2020?
Well, I was impressed by the product, meaning Bain's ability to support a founder and accelerate a company's trajectory. I had seen that for many years at Clary. Clary is a company that I'd incubated at Sequoia that BCV, Bain Capital Ventures, had invested in. And it was through working there that I got to know my now partner, Ajay Agarwal. There's another Bain partner, Enrique Salem, who I'd known previously for many years because when he was CEO at Symantec, he'd acquired my startup company and we'd worked together for a year. And as I watched them both work with Andy, Clary's CEO, um, it's just very impressive how they help shape the company through a combination of incredible access to customer accounts and really on-point strategic advice that came from deep domain expertise. And and so it just felt like a natural move to join the team.
And talk a bit about the relationship between Bain Capital generally and Bain Capital Ventures more specifically. Bain Capital, 3 decades or more old at this point. Bain Capital Ventures a little bit newer. Talk a bit about the relationship between the two, if you would.
Yeah, so I think we're very clear on what setup works best. And that is for investment decisions, they are entirely made by BCV, by Bain Capital Ventures. No founder will meet anyone from Bain Capital unless they want to. And that's really because the best decisions in venture, and I think you speak to any experienced investor that'll tell you this, they're made by a small group of investors who really know the space very well. And so we keep our investment process pretty light, decision making quick, and the decision making unit down to about 6 people, because that gives you enough diversity of perspective around things. But it's a small, intimate group, and I think people still feel comfortable taking risk because the danger in venture is not losing money; it's not taking enough risk in the things that you seek to back. So investment decisions are entirely within BCV. After the investment, we leverage the reach and resources of Bain Capital to help our companies with customer introductions, strategic partnerships, international expansion. As one example, many health tech companies, we have a number of very promising health tech companies. Many of them want to integrate with the EMR, the electronic medical record systems that exist within the companies that they're selling to. We happen to own Athena, which is one of the biggest EMRs. And Athena will make its own decisions, of course, but it definitely helps to have that Bain Capital connection. So we leverage relationships like that to help our companies after investment.
And I mentioned at the outset some of the areas of focus for you, AI-powered applications, generally speaking. Home in on that a little bit further, if you would, to talk a bit about sort of how you define the breadbasket that is yours in terms of what you're looking for and what informs your investment theses.
I'm a believer that exceptional people lead you to exceptional opportunities. And so my North Star is really trying to find the very small number of irrationally driven, independent thinking people with a bias to action who build things and who can think at both a product and a systems level. And whenever I find one of those, I find that they teach me so much, and they just create this excitement within me about working with them. and I get drawn in to what they're working on. And right now, there are two or three big themes, I'd say, that are shaping the world. And the one of those that I'm focused on is AI. And AI has drawn this incredible talent pool. And so I'll invest in pretty much anything applying AI or building technology around AI that has a founder like that on a mission that I come to believe in, that I want to support.
Very interesting, and obviously an area of great consequence these days, to say the least. You've said that generative AI, especially, is a once in a generation opportunity, similar in scale to the internet. And I'd love to have you describe some of the latest value propositions that have you most excited as you think about the topic.
The one that I love the most is this idea that every human becomes a manager of thousands of agents. I think that people are familiar now with the concept of an agent as opposed to an application. An application helps humans do work, an agent completes tasks itself. Um, and an agent is able to complete tasks because it has reasoning capabilities and it can use tools like click around in the browser. And we're on the cusp of that now. And so my vision for humanity is that each person really becomes the CEO of their agent army. And everyone gets to up-level their work and their thinking to do the kind of work that only humans can do. And that means none of the kind of brainless, repetitive tasks that, Peter, you and I sadly are very familiar with from our lives and our careers, where we spend a lot of time inputting data or cutting and pasting things. No more wasted time if you're a consumer on hold or filling out mind-numbing forms that you don't even understand. All of that goes away. And I think we see it happening in pockets today, beginning to happen in areas like code generation or customer support or legal, and soon it'll happen everywhere. And so that this up leveling for humanity, I think is just tremendously exciting.
No doubt. Talk a bit about, and obviously this is fast evolving, but as you think about agentic AI, especially, or generative AI, even a bit more generally, what is it best used for today versus the promise of what you just described? Obviously, we're not yet, and you highlighted, in fact, that we're on the cusp of a lot of what you've described, of taking away the menial tasks. There are still some, of course, that we're going to be doing for quite some time, but or for some time anyway. Talk a bit about where things stand now and the promise of what might be to come in the near term.
Yeah, so I'd separate companies and consumers. On the company side, I think there are really two journeys that people have to take with AI. One is using AI to make their internal operations more efficient. The other is building AI into their customer experience so they can serve customers using AI. For the first piece of that, the making their internal operations more efficient, there they really should be partnering with vendors. They should not be building things themselves unless for the typical company, because speed is everything. They should be focusing elsewhere. The two clear areas that are total no-brainers today that every company should be doing is initiatives around code generation, customer support. And then there are specific vertical type things in legal or healthcare, a handful of other areas where they could also be applying things. So, in code generation, GitHub Copilot is really not enough. They should be evaluating cursor recognition or Claude Code or what have you. A handful of leading products in customer support, they should be looking at things like Decagon. In legal or what have you, there'll be a handful of companies in each of these areas. So that's one piece, which is making their internal operations more efficient. The second piece, which is almost just as important, maybe more important, is building AI into their customer experience. That will be a voyage of discovery, and that's the thing that customers, I think, really need to get to start the journey on, because how you do that isn't clear. If you're United Airlines and you want to use AI to help someone book an airline ticket, what does the consumer still want to do? What are they willing to hand off to someone else? You're going to have to iterate a little bit around that to figure it out. And I think that's true for most companies. So that's the situation. Now, on the consumer side, we haven't yet seen the most exciting applications. I think each of us will have a personal assistant over time to take care of tasks. I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of time booking air tickets or kind of scheduling appointments in my personal life. And it would be really nice if I had an assistant to do that. I think that'll happen. Each of us will probably have coaches and therapists and advisors that are AIs, most likely friends, what we would count as being friends. You could look at the response to taking away GPT 4.5 and what have you recently as being an example of how that's already beginning to happen. A lot of that will start with the young because the young lean into new trends, but I think that's also fairly inevitable. So those are some of the things that I think on the horizon and near enough that we can see. And then there'll be a whole bunch of other stuff that we can't yet imagine.
Yeah, very interesting. You mentioned a couple different times in our conversation already the excitement you have about legal and healthcare as two industries that are going to be impacted. Dive in a little bit further on those as to why those are early use cases that clearly excite you, and what is it about them that suggests perhaps the industries that are next or ripe for comparable evolution or revolution, as the case may be, in use of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so healthcare. Historically, tech companies have gone to healthcare and said, you guys are screwed up. You're doing it all wrong. You should do it this way, and have brought an engineer's mindset, to which healthcare has said, no thanks. And as a result, there hasn't been a gigantic impact of software on healthcare outcomes. I think the difference here is that now with AI, tech companies can go to healthcare companies and say, keep doing what you're doing. We'll just add a layer between you and the end user to absorb the inefficiency and the pain of how you're operating. So you can keep operating the way you are. And healthcare is a quirky sector because of the role of payers and the government and other things. That's not going to change. But the consumer experience can improve massively. And so right now, that's mainly been on the non-clinical side with different approaches to revenue cycle management or medical chart review. I work with one company, Charter, and there are several others in and around that area. But over time, it's going to bleed over into clinical outcomes by helping doctors and medical systems provide better care to patients. And we're just at the beginning stage of that happening. That's the wonderful thing in healthcare. Legal's a little different. In legal, it's just the perfect industry for LLMs, meaning, legal is like code with words, meaning you're stipulating all these things that must happen in these edge case scenarios, all these rights and obligations people have. It's kind of over explaining everything in this kind of super precise but long-winded way. And what that does is it just lends itself to models because humans glaze over when they read this stuff. I mean, it's really boring. Whereas models have a much higher kind of boredom threshold. And as a result, they can manipulate these words with much greater efficiency. And so I think a lot of legal work just gets automated through LLMs. Now, there are some obstacles to overcome. Obviously, there's been a lot of coverage around hallucination and the risk of that, and that's true. But I think all of that stuff can be managed over time. And we're going to have kind of AI native, AI powered law firms that just transform the legal industry. And we're working with one company like that, Crosby Law, but there are others too. And so that's what makes both of those industries, puts them on the leading edge. But ultimately, every company will be affected by this, and I think it'll go across all industries. The tech industry is embracing it, of course. I think government services could be massively improved. I think education will be transformed. We have one company, Magic School, that helps teachers come up with lesson plans, as an example. Think of how overworked teachers are. So it'll have a big impact in education. Every major sector of the economy. I think these new world models that have been created will accelerate the adoption of robotics. And once that'll be another leap forward is once we can connect the intelligence in a model with someone physically moving something in the real world. It's not unrealistic to say that in a reasonable time frame, hard to estimate exactly what, maybe not the next 5 years, but a little beyond that, that we'll have home robots doing a lot of domestic work. So I think it'll just be a wave that sweeps through the economy over the next 20 years.
And what do you foresee as some of the human implications of that? Even hearing you talk about the changes in the legal industry, one can certainly imagine that the quantity of paralegals will probably will diminish perhaps as a result of some of what can be done with artificial intelligence, to name one of a variety of great white collar jobs actually
Yeah.
that are at risk. Talk about your own vision about how you foresee the evolution of some of these roles as a result of the work that is replaced with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, in the long term, we'll be fine. In the short term, even, we'll be fine. And in the medium time, it'll be bumpy. And what I mean by that is um, there will be new jobs created. If you look at a lot of jobs today, I mean, when I was a child, there was no job as a geneticist or a personal trainer. These jobs, a personal trainer, what do? They instruct people on how to exercise. If you told me when I was a child that was a job, I would have said, you're crazy. Why would you pay anyone to do that? So there are lots of jobs that get created all the time as society shifts. And I think that'll of course be the case with AI. The young will be great. I mean, I think the young will naturally take to this. They will use AI as consumers, and then that will naturally bleed over into the workplace where it'll be natural again for them to use AI, just as using personal computers and mobile phones and the internet was a total no-brainer for any young person coming into the workforce in the early 2000s, let's say. So they'll have no problem. You and I will probably be retired by the time, 20 years time or whatever it is, 30 years time, when by the time these trends are fully played out. But there is always a group in the middle that has invested in a set of skills that get challenged. Pointed out that with paralegals, and maybe it becomes over time nurses or teachers or other really valuable people in society. And in that group, what happens is they will have to redefine their role. There will absolutely be a need for nurses and teachers and people doing legal work, but what that job is will transform, will change, and they will have to move with that trend. And hopefully as a society we support that. Hopefully in America there's a strong spirit of individualism. It's on the individual to really have an attitude of lifelong learning and reinvent themselves. And so I think America will cope with it better than other countries because of that buccaneering spirit. But there will be this middle generation that will have to adapt.
Yeah. You've been, as I noted earlier, a venture investor partner for a dozen years or so now. And I wonder, you mentioned some of the factors that you look for in terms of the entrepreneurs to invest in, and ultimately it is people, in addition to the ideas those people have, that you're putting dollars against. I wonder, given the newness of some of the topics, and also given what you've just described in terms of people that are more AI native, people unlike you and I, who
Yeah.
have spent the vast majority of our time, even professionally, of course, without the use of at least the latest versions of artificial intelligence, versus, let's say, people that are teenagers or early 20s. I wonder if the age of or any other factors associated with that would represent differences between the kinds of people you're investing in today versus, say, a dozen years ago when you were starting. Are there differences? Perhaps there aren't, but I would love to have your reflections on that, the extent to which there are.
Not really. I think it's a mindset thing more than an age thing.
Hmm.
I mean, we've backed founders in their 50s who are domain experts and, for whatever reason, incredibly driven, successful people who are incredibly driven and really want to build things. And then we've backed kind of founders in their 20s as who don't know anything about the industry that they're going after, but have some other talent or some other angle on the market that we find intriguing. So it's really, I really think it's I don't know what yours is, Peter. You speak to lots of people as a podcaster. I feel it's really mindset over biological age.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's a fair point. That learning agility and the ability and curiosity to be able to seek the experiences and skill sets of the future, as opposed to resting on the laurels of those of the past or present, even.
Yeah, I mean, how people work and operate and their strength change as they age. As you and I know, it's analytical capabilities degrade as you get older, but you have a bit more perspective and experience to draw on. And if you draw on that experience in the right way and maintain some flexibility in thinking, then it can be a huge asset.
You've already begun to mention some of the portfolio companies you're most excited about. I'd love to see if there are others that personify some of what you've described from among those that you've invested in, especially the extent to which you have some that are kind of enterprise ready, given the fact that a lot of our audience are people who run technology for larger organizations. What are some
Yeah.
that personify some of the trends you've already described?
Well, I'll give you two. Decagon is AI-powered customer support. I really believe that's kind of like a total no-brainer for anyone who has um, anyone who has customers contacting them for support issues. Typically, companies serving consumers, where there's a large volume, typically a large ticket volume. I mean, in every case, by adopting an AI-powered solution, you can you can raise your NPS. You can accelerate response times and raise your NPS. And we found that when you put in one of these systems, a human agent can respond to about 1,000 tickets a month. That's the rate that a human can operate. And often they're small teams, sometimes of only 3 or 4 people doing 3,000, 4,000. You put in an AI powered system and they'll do 10x the volume at a lower cost. And so we've seen companies go from 3,000 tickets a month with 3 agents to 30,000 tickets a month with 3 agents. And so why is that? Well, because people don't like sitting on hold and they basically just give up if there's too much friction. But if they can get instant correct answers to whatever their question is, they're very happy. And so that raises your NPS significantly. And so I feel like certainly every large company with an IVR, which is an integrated voice response system, should be switching over, should just be removing that IVR, which is the IVR is that system that has every consumer mashing the 0 button as soon as they get the automated voice because it can't understand a word they're saying. I don't know if it's my accent, but I find they can't understand anything. And so all of those go to AI-powered agents from companies like Decagon, and Decagon's one of the leading solutions. Um, and I think that's just a very tangible, quick win that lowers costs and increases customer satisfaction. And by the way, for the customer support team, I think it redefines the role of a customer support agent from being someone who's just answering the same questions every day. And it up levels them to being someone who sits there and A/B tests different answers. So they look at, well, what are the unsuccessful ones that the agent has done? And let me test this answer against that answer. Let me sample a set of answers to check that the agent's doing a good job. Each individual gets to manage that army of agents that I was talking about earlier. And that can happen today. So that's one company that's growing very quickly and I think is doing a wonderful job. A second area is around more creative tools, and we backed this company Crea, which is image creation and refinement, and it is incredible what you can do with image-based models today. In terms of the images and videos that you can create. The large labs, OpenAI and Anthropic and what have you, do not have the leading models. They're different models that are better for different purposes. Many Chinese models, which are open weight and can be deployed here securely and used here. And so what Crea does is it integrates across all those models and provides a really simple, compelling UI for marketing teams to be able to create whatever videos and images they would want to support their marketing efforts. Very quick, very responsive, very easy to use, inexpensive. And they've seen just thousands of users sign up organically. And if anyone's interested, they should check them out on Twitter to see what the product could do.
I thank you for sharing those. You've mentioned a couple times now the promise of an army of agents at our disposal, and I'm curious, as we compare that to an army of people that might be on one's team, what's the process of managing those agents from your perspective? Obviously, they are not infallible, and
Yes.
there will be a necessity for course correction. Some will be more successful than others, not unlike humans, right? And so,
Yeah.
even thinking about almost an HR process, for lack of a better way of framing it, to promote those that are doing well, to provide improvement plans for those that necessitate it, and frankly, firing others that are not. Talk a little bit about how you think about that across the army you're describing.
Well, first thing is this army of agents doesn't replace humans. We don't have enough humans to answer every customer support call. It's an expansion of the workforce that will accelerate economic growth. How they're managed is not the same as humans. Humans are sentient, emotional beings. We have HR departments and people leaders because we are human beings. We have different reasonable needs and desires, and we need to collaborate and work together, and that can be difficult sometimes because people have lots of things going on in their lives. Agents don't have any of that. So you don't need any of the kind of HR style infrastructure for that. What you do need is you need tools to manage them, as I was kind of briefly describing customer support, that you do have to check their work. Ultimately, humans remain accountable for the decisions and what happens. And so long as you're accountable, you're going to want visibility and control. And so you're going to need to see what these agents are doing in a time efficient way. You're going to want to train them and improve them. So if an agent makes a mistake, you change its reward function so that it no longer makes that mistake. And then that immediately carries over across every other agent because you change all the agent reward functions because they're the same and they would make the same mistake in the same situation. And so in that way, you raise their level of capability in a unified way. But it's through humans applying scientific principles through a series of easy to use tools over a period of time. There's not an HR department for agents.
Very interesting to get your perspectives on how one might do those assessments and make sure that there is in fact ongoing improvements relative to that army that is at your disposal. One of the things among the things you do to help the companies you invest in is helping with recruiting and organization design. And I wonder, how do you assess the needs of the companies that you advise in this manner? What are some of the methods you use in order to provide that assistance? And I'm recognizing, of course, there are going to be differences across each organization, but wondering if there are any patterns you might offer.
Yeah, I mean, every company is different. I think back to my own experience as an entrepreneur, where I started two companies. The first as a founder, where I was basically terrified, had terrible imposter syndrome, did a horrible job as a first-time founder CEO, and was really very fortunate that someone came along and bought the company. And then a second company where Clearwell, which thanks to the wonderful team we had, we were able to grow over 6 years to 100 million in ARR and about 300 people, profitable, growing 80% a year, as a very efficient vertical SaaS model built on consumption pricing. And that's where I was more of a CEO and wrap my head around what it is to run a company. And so I often think back to that experience, and then my previous board experiences now across a dozen years with companies at all different stages. And I try to think about, where does this company need to be in 6 to 12 months? Because that, as a founder, was the thing I found hardest. I would, as a founder, I was always mired in the day-to-day. There is just so much stuff that comes at you. And even if your company's doing well and everyone's congratulating you on the outside the company, inside it still feels like a runaway train and balanced, on a knife's edge and can collapse at any moment. And so I tried, and so in that situation, founders, it's just really hard. It's very lonely because the founders typically always have to project confidence and have a plan. And there's no precedent for where the company will be. You've just got some kind of crazy growth plan that you have to hit, and you have very little time to think about the longer term things. And so I try to think about, what do they need to be doing now that may not be obvious or top of mind, and then really kind of like try to engage them around that. I feel like all founders, as all human beings, they have blind spots. They're things that they just don't see. And so I try to cover the blind spots without getting in the way of their brilliance. So that's the objective.
I really like that description, and I want to go back to the fact that you are a multiple-time founder and head of venture-backed companies, previously Center Run, as well as Clearwell Systems, which you just mentioned. As you noted, in the first time around, you were not only lonely but also really felt deeply the imposter syndrome that is natural to anyone who is in fact an imposter to some extent in the initial stages as
Yeah.
they learn what they're doing. I'd love to have you reflect a little bit further about what you drew, first of all, from the first experience from Center Run to the second at Clearwell Systems, and likewise, you've begun to mention it. I'm just asking you maybe to go with a little bit more depth in the what you've already provided in how you then parlay that with your kind of empathetic view to those who are now in the throes of that same experience now.
Yeah. So Centron was a company I started with a couple of wonderful co-founders right out of grad school. And I was a first-time founder, CEO, completely unqualified. Uh, and it's just I'd show up to work afraid every day about what I was meant to be doing. I would interview executives. I have no idea which was a good one, which was not a good one. And it's just given me a deep empathy for the founder experience. I think it's hard to convey the sense of responsibility that you feel as a founder. You are the person who gets everyone into this project, whether they're employees or investors or customers, and you feel this incredible burden of responsibility to make sure that everyone gets out of it happy and having achieved what they're looking for. And so I know that weighs on people. I mean, that just weighs on you. I felt when we sold my second company, I felt this burden lift off my shoulders. And so I try to remember that, because when we're discussing stressful topics, at one of my companies, we had a call with the board and some lawyers about a difficult topic yesterday as an example. And I made sure that I ended the call by trying to, after the lawyers had were done, were by trying to remind the founder to put it in perspective, that not to feel emotionally drained by this, that there were other more important priorities, and that a year from now we wouldn't even remember this, even though right now it's all consuming. So I think that empathy and perspective is what I try to share from my own experience as a founder. Um, Clearwell, my second company, is quite different in that we grew and we scaled and we hit product market fit. And I remember how painful that felt. I thought product market fit would solve our problems. Turned out it just created more problems, because we were massively understaffed, and um, everyone was working around the clock and burning out, and we had all these competitors suddenly coming after us as they took notice of us. And that's more of a kind of, but I felt much calmer. I felt much more confident of my decisions. And I try to help most of the people I work with, the first time founders. I just try to use that experience to think about, again, where the company needs to be going and what are the things that the CEO needs to be thinking about.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm fascinated by those reflections and the extent to which your past experiences naturally inform the way in which you advise those companies that you invest in. I wanted to also ask, you've spoken and written a bit about vibe coding as a topic that really
Oh
excites you.
yeah.
And I wonder if you could take a moment and kind of describe that and why you find it so exciting. Talk a little bit about how you see that evolving.
The great thing about vibe coding really hit my radar when my 15-year-old son on a Friday night decided to spend his time coding up an app with his buddy instead of playing Fortnite. And that has never happened before, Peter. I've never seen him want to do that. He is, it's just never happened. And so I was quite astounded by this, and started using some of these tools myself, and they finally deliver on the promise of democratizing access to software, which is, I've been hearing this pitch for 20 years. It's never been a reality. Now it's becoming a reality. That is just amazing. If you think, I mean, in global terms, historically, we've had about 30 million people on GitHub. I'll call that the real software developer universe, building software that's consumed by 6 billion people, roughly. There's never been such an imbalance for any product when you have 30 million people making something for 6 billion people. I mean, usually that comes into equilibrium, and that hasn't happened. But now it can do. This imbalance can go away as non-technical people with imagination can just go on and just create a disposable application. And so that's what I find most exciting. So what will people do? I don't know. I think consumers will create apps like whenever I get a text from you, you'll appear as a little kitten emoji on my phone and speak out the text and then send something back to you, or I'm a little puppy or something. I think consumers will experiment like that. And in the workplace, I think people will be creating ad hoc applications. I have a project coming up that I need to work with these two people on this thing. Let me create an app specifically dedicated to that project because it'll take me half an hour or 45 minutes. And then that automates a bunch of the workflow around that project, and then it goes away. Whereas before, we could only really try automating major workflows like sales or HR or customer support or something. So that's what I have. That's what I find so exciting. Today, a lot of it is just play and toys, but a lot of things start as play and then become more serious. And so I think vibe coding is really the start of something very significant that is going to redefine organizations.
What does it suggest in terms of the future of software development, even like technical education? It strikes me the way you're describing this, and certainly have experienced myself, that the extent to which this is more democratizing and perhaps making accessible what was
Yeah.
more than esoteric to non-technologists has profound implications, as you note, of becoming a great equalizer. And I wonder, does it even have you thinking about recommendations for your children as to what they go off and study, perhaps different than what you would have if you were 20 years older and your children likewise were as well?
Uh, well, I think I have a reflection on parenting, and then I'll come to the technology. I think what most people want for their children is different from what they want for themselves. What they want for themselves is autonomy. They want to do whatever the heck they want. What they want for their children is safety. So they want to recommend their children do safe things. If you become a lawyer, become a doctor, become a software engineer, that's safe because you can always earn a living. And I just think that's fundamentally bad advice because the world is changing very quickly. There is no safety. And apart from which, safety-based advice is grounded in fear as opposed to more of a confident, kind of optimistic perspective, which I think if your objective, which I think the objective should be, teach your children how to think and to help them discover what they're interested in and just teach them how to think. And then just have confidence that that child will figure something out in a changing economy where the jobs 20, 30 years from now are going to be completely different from the jobs that people do today. And so with that in mind, I think vibe coding is a wonderful thing because it's a much bigger on-ramp. And so it gives people exposure. And it broadens the spectrum. Before, there was this giant hurdle where you had to learn how to write code, which not everyone wants to do. Now, you don't need to learn how to write code as much. You can still create. That'll inspire some people to learn how to write code who wouldn't have before. It'll lead to a bunch of other people never bothering to write code and just playing at the level that they're at and applying that to some domain they're interested in and creating something that the world is interested in. So I generally feel a bigger on-ramp to things is a good thing.
Yeah. No, it also suggests, I mean, as a variety of things of what topics we've covered in this conversation, that companies may be smaller in the future as a result
Yes.
of the collaboration between artificial intelligence, for example, and humans together, and so the complexion of organizations, not just skill based, but even just volume based, is likely to be quite different, no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll be a larger volume of smaller companies.
Yeah, well said. I wonder, are there other trends that excite you that are related to the topics we talked about, but maybe not directly covered yet? What are other things that are on your roadmap to investigate or get smart
Hmm.
on, or that you're beginning to develop hypotheses around that you might share?
Um, I don't know. I mean, the couple of things that I think I find most engaging, interesting right now. One is just improvements in the underlying models because they're the engine that power everything. And we've barely scratched the surface on reasoning models and how they can improve. We're seeing huge jumps in coding. Coding as an industry has gone from 0 to over $1 billion in revenue in 2, 3 years. Unimaginable growth. And I think other areas will follow. So there are a lot of domain-specific models that are coming out. For for scientific information or for in biology and in material science, new physics models, new world models, which will power robotics. And so I find that whole area absolutely fascinating because it's kind of like the underlying engine that powers everything else. So that's one trend that I'm interested in, and domain-specific models specifically. So because they don't compete with the core foundation models, they're doing something adjacent with it based off a different data set. And then the second area, what I think of as truly AI native apps, things that are only possible with AI. And I'm mindful that if you look at history in mobile, the iPhone came out in 2007, but we didn't get WhatsApp and Uber and other AI native apps until 3, 4, 5 years later, after humanity had digested what's possible, Snapchat, until people had digested what's possible with this new amazing thing that had been dropped into the world from the future. And I think it'll be a little bit like that with AI, where they're going to be right now. We're still in the kind of filming radio shows stage of fairly straightforward ideas replacing and improving on things that exist already. But over the next 5 years, there'll be apps that are only possible with AI, and are just radically different from what we've seen before. Like, for example, you might have an app with no UI. It just might be an invisible app that just works in the background to do a bunch of things. Um, and I'm just fascinated by those. So those are the things that I'm most on watching out for. The crazier or the less probable the idea, the more interesting it is, just for what it suggests from the person who's excited by it.
How have your personal workflows changed in light of so much of what we talked about? What's different today than a couple of years back in terms of how you organize yourself and test hypotheses, think about investments, etc.?
Oh, well, as you age, your memory degrades. I don't know if you found this, Peter, but
Unfortunately,
yeah, my mind used to be much tackier than it is right now. Things used to stick a lot more easily. And so now I take more notes than I used to, because before I just remember it. Now I'm more of a goldfish. And so I find note-taking apps are fantastic because I'm not interested in capturing a transcript of everything. But if you have something that just captures the key points, that is really useful. So that my personal workflow has changed in that I use note-taking apps that are very efficient. The other big change in my personal workflow, I'd say, is I never type on my phone anymore. So I talk to my phone. I have a kind of voice recognition little plugin because Siri is so atrocious, and and I find that I can pretty much speak about anything, and it'll get it right to pretty high level of fidelity. And so I'm sending longer texts and longer emails and what have you off my mobile phone than I used to. That'll be a
do
second example.
you care to share the apps you use for both the two examples you gave?
Yeah, sure. So for note taking, I use Granola, which we're not an investor in, but it's a great company. And then it was a great product. I don't know the company. And then for the voice plugin for the iPhone, I use Whisperflow, which is a team of, I believe, about 5 people who've produced a better product than Apple have in the last 20 years.
Again, a sign of the times.
Yeah, exactly. It's incredible.
Extraordinary. I wanted to, before I let you go, RF, I wanted, as somebody who obviously speaks with so many people, reads broadly in order to continue to educate yourself. What are some, what do you read or watch or listen to that you would recommend to others that you find particularly insightful in a time like this that is so dynamic?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I tend not to read about technology when it comes to books, just because I spend my entire day reading about technology. So if I set aside tech blogs and newsletters, I just finished The Wide, Wide Seas by Hampton Sides, which is a story of Captain Cook's explorations in the 1700s, which I found fascinating because he's kind of setting off into the unknown. It's like he's getting onto a spaceship and going across the world, and his first contact with these different people. I'll confess that I like sci-fi. This is a kind of historical sci-fi in a sense. Thanks to my daughter, I've just got sucked into Silo on TV, which I try to avoid television, but as an activity with my daughter, I've been watching that, which is this kind of post-environmental collapse. What could happen with humanity? Podcast wise, I love the Knowledge Project. So I'd definitely recommend that to people because I think Shane does a lovely job of going deep in a variety of different areas. So those are some ideas.
Great ideas all. Thank you so much, RF. And thank you more generally for a great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your experience and wisdom through this conversation. It's been a great pleasure. Thanks again.
Likewise, Peter, really wonderful to talk to you. Thank you for having me.